delighted to be with you to do an introduction today for Dr. John Taylor. And today's session that he has prepared for you is the lowdown on natural consequences. And this is really geared towards parents working with their children, or really anyone who is raising children, and how to really have those teaching opportunities, understand the different types of things that might happen and how to best handle them. So, as you're watching this, raise your hand if you're like, I would love to know the best way to teach this to my children that's effective, awakening, and empowering to them. Well, today you're in for a treat because that's what Dr. John Taylor is going to teach you. He has all kinds of great tools for you at Parentology.guide. So I encourage you to visit the site. That'll come up at the end of the webinar today, so you'll be able to see exactly where to go, but it's Parentology.guide. And he's been doing this, gosh, for so long. I've known him for many years because he's my father. And he really specializes in helping people make the connection with relationship with themselves and have a greater understanding so they can have more success. And who doesn't want more success in their relationships? He's written over 24 books. He's traveled the world educating people in live seminars. And now we have the privilege of having him using this technology so we can connect to people all over the world. So please share with your friends. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on Dr. John Taylor. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Charlene, and thank you so much for being with us. What a thrill it is for me to be able to share with you how to make natural consequences really work. Natural consequences are sort of the oddball in the world of child discipline. Many people don't understand them. They don't understand what it is. They dismiss them, poo-poo them. Actually, natural consequences are one of the best discipline techniques out there. And I wanted to explain to you how to really take advantage of them, really incorporate them. They're a really honest kind of learning, and it's important that we really manage them well. So I'd like to give you a little crash course in that. So we're going to get to the lowdown on natural consequences today. And our lowdown on natural consequences starts with a definition. That is my definition of natural consequences. It is whatever is going to happen anyway if you do nothing. One of the interesting things about natural consequences is you don't do them to children. You've heard all these other discipline techniques. Do this to them, reward them for this, punish them for that, ignore them if you da-da-da-da-da. This one, you don't do. It's whatever would happen anyway if you didn't do anything. Now, that is the meaning of the word natural in this case. Now, some of those are what would happen if Mother Nature does it to him. Now, here's Johnny's little bicycle. Consider it an act of misbehavior that he leaves it carelessly next to the garage wall outside. And what does Mother Nature do? Well, it covers his bike with dirt, dust, insects, chew on the tires, get in the seat, rust of the bicycle, etc., etc. So that's a natural, quote, natural, unquote, consequence. It's actually literally Mother Nature, or as the courts would say, an act of God. Now, all so-called acts of God are natural consequences, but many natural consequences don't involve Mother Nature, the forces of nature, or what a court would call act of God kind of phenomena. Some of those natural consequences are man-made. Now, how about the child who keeps pestering the tiny dog? And you've nagged and nagged your child, told him over and over, stop pestering the dog. And he never listens. He keeps pestering the dog. Well, the natural consequence of his pestering the dog is the dog will nip him. That's Mother Nature's version of natural consequence. That's what I'm talking about here. Now, some of those so-called natural consequences are not Mother Nature. They're not acts of God and so forth. They're very human. There's our bad guy, and he's stealing the bicycle. Now, suppose it's an act of misbehavior that the child leaves the bicycle prominently in the front yard of your own home, and while you and this child go on a 1-week vacation. And you've told her over and over again, put your bicycle away whenever we're away from the house. And it's not just an act of low IQ and therefore malfunctioning. It's an act of a chosen act by the child, and thus qualifies as misbehavior. Then we would consider it a discipline opportunity, as all natural consequences are. So, some natural consequences are acts of God, some are not. God doesn't steal bicycles, but thieves steal bicycles. So the natural consequence of leaving the bike out in the front yard where you and she and the whole family goes on a 1-week vacation would include acts of nature. The wind comes along and knocks the bike over, the rain comes along and the bike rusts, the insects start getting all over the bicycle, the bike gets dirty, and man-made, the world, other people, and so forth. So the big deal about natural consequences is they should be renamed in the first place. People wouldn't have so much confusion about it if we just call them non-contrived consequences. So there are lots of contrived consequences that people will do in child discipline, but this category are those that you don't do. Other people do it. Now, what is the natural consequence of the child being a smart mouth to the teacher? The teacher gets angry at the child. The teacher might send the child to the office. The teacher might put the child's name on the board. The teacher might administer some sort of school discipline. That's a natural consequence. The world is doing it to the child. Mommy and daddy didn't do it. Mommy and daddy didn't contrive it. So you don't really do a natural consequence. You didn't steal the bicycle. You didn't cause the bicycle to rust. You didn't nip the child. The dog nipped the child. So you don't do natural consequence. But there's something very important I want you to do about them, and that is that third line on this slide. Decide whether to prevent it. Now, so you don't do them, and you don't decide to do them to your child, but you do decide, should I allow it to unfold? Should I let her learn the hard way? Should I let nature take its course? Should I let whatever consequences will befall from the world out there, the people and Mother Nature and all that? Should I do that? That would involve two things. Will she learn something from this? And is it safe to do and not too harsh? What's the natural consequence of your child running carelessly out in front of traffic? Well, you don't want to let her learn the hard way with natural consequences of that. But the natural consequence of pestering a small dog, maybe you might want to say, well, I don't want to prevent that. He's not listening to me. I'll let him learn the hard way. And your child is nipped by this small dog. Now, we're not talking about a pit bull here that's going to go for your child's throat. See? And then the child says, he starts crying, the dog nipped me. And then the rest of the story happens on the rest of these slides, but it's an interesting thing you can do. Let me show you that. You interpret the teaching point. You make sure the child learned his lesson. I'm sorry the dog nipped you, honey. What can you learn from this? What can you change so the dog doesn't bite you in again? I'm sorry the thief stole your bicycle. What can you learn from that event, honey? What can you do next time we leave and that you have a bicycle? So just make sure they learn the lesson and allow them to learn from it. Now here we have an interesting phenomenon. The slide doesn't say this, but I wanted you to understand something very important here. Natural consequences also work in reverse. You can help them learn their lesson of a positive action they took. It's not so much discipline as it is guidance. What's the natural consequence of your child having a small garden and using fertilizer, weeding it, watering it, a beautiful, bounteous harvest of delicious food? You can point that out. Make sure she learns her lesson. Look what you did, honey. Look, do you see how big these squash are and how delicious they are? Well, imagine if you hadn't weeded, if you hadn't watered them, you hadn't taken care of it, you wouldn't have anything like this, would you? And you could be really proud of yourself. You did. Isn't this great? You did it. And so there you are. It's not really child discipline. You're building self-confidence, self-esteem, all these good things. So it's really a natural consequence. It's positive. So natural consequences are quite universal. How do we all learn from what happens to us the hard way? If we work well, diligently, obey the rules, generally a positive outcome will occur. So don't overlook that aspect of natural consequences. Go ahead and talk about the good things, the good news. Celebrate the joy of your child's successes. It's actually from a natural consequence. But if a natural consequence comes around, if the child's actions lead to something that's negative, and it was a chosen act by the child's part, then it's child discipline. And another beautiful thing about him is this next slide. The child can't blame you. You get to stand by as a helpful ally. As my examples indicated, I'm sorry your bike was stolen, honey. I love you. I know that's terrible. And so here you are, giving all that empathy, all that sweet, good empathy that actually increases the love bond between you and your child. So you're actually standing by as an ally, even offering to help next time. What can they do? And then the child really can't say, well, it's all your fault. The thief stole my bicycle. You're supposed to remind me. And you're looking at it for the 100th time? No, Now, which brings me to another point. Make sure the child does have the consequence. And let the sting of the natural event be there. And you just empathize with how painful that is. I'm sorry it's happening for you. I'm sorry the dog bit you. That's painful, isn't it? It feels terrible to have someone steal from you, doesn't it? Go ahead and let the pain be there. Empathize with it. But the child can't blame you for all this. So it's a clean form of learning. The child is learning very honestly. And the child will really learn those lessons from natural consequences. They're actually one of the best, most powerful ways to teach lessons about self-control, avoiding carelessness, etc. And about positive actions by the child when you interpret it as a positive consequence. So that is the big beauty about natural consequences. You're still in a love bond. You're loving. You're not scolding. And your part, you can avoid the senseless stuff about I told you so, how many times I have to tell you, you deserve to be bitten, etc. You don't do any of that kind of negative stuff. You don't have to feel guilty about yourself, mouthing off to your child and scolding him. No scolding needed. The pain is there. This kid's bleeding from the dog nipping him and got her bike stolen. So the pain is there. Stand by as a helpful ally. I love you. What can we do for next time? And what we can do for next time is change things. What can you change for next time, honey? And little guy learns, well, I could stop pestering the dog. Yeah, that's right. And I think you're going to stop nagging him about pestering that dog once the dog bites him. I think that'll do it. And that's what I mean. The natural consequences really do the teaching. Same thing with a carelessly placed bicycle and so forth. Well, let's see what else. One more thing I wanted to show you here. That is, you end natural consequences on a positive note. Remember I said stand by and with an ally and all that. Please include empathy. A big healthy dose of empathy. I'm sorry this happened for you. It sure feels bad, doesn't it, darling? What can we change for next time? I will help you change. Let's decide together how we will change so the dog won't nip you anymore. What can you do differently about the dog when you want to play with the dog other than pester it the way you do? What's a better place to store your bicycle for next time and so forth? Now this brings up another thing. No rescuing. You don't buy another bicycle for the child who is careless and that considered an act of misbehavior. She buys it out of her allowance. She works for it. You don't get rid of the dog because it nipped the child. But basically, you end on empathy. And of course, another one of these little mini webinars was on empathy. I taught you the several components of empathy. So go ahead and look at all these mini webinars. They all tie together. They're all products of my 45 years of helping people, and I'm glad to give them to you. I want this to really make a lot of sense for you. I want all these to be very helpful for you. You can get lots of resources on all this at my website, Parentology.guide. You can email me, Parentology.guide64@gmail.com. And I just want you to know that these are very important principles. I want you to be really good with child discipline and have it always be an act of love. With every act of discipline, your child should feel safe, loved, and respected by you at that moment. I know no better way to do that than to take advantage of natural consequences when they do come along. Remember, you don't make them happen, but if one comes along, use it wisely. This and other techniques of discipline are all summarized in my book on child discipline that I wrote. It's called From Defiance to Cooperation. Of course, many authors have written excellent books on child discipline. We have lots of them on our website as well. Well, it's been great to be with you today. Hope this is really helpful for you. Look forward to seeing you again at another one of my little 15-minute mini webinars, and also the inexpensive 2-hour versions of all these things. You can find out all about that on my website. I hope you can spread the word about these, especially these free ones, to people who can be helped by them. Thank you so much. Look forward to having you again next time.